Alrighty, what is going on, y'all? Hopefully, you guys are doing well despite this coronavirus that's still affecting us all. I hope and I pray that you are well and that God is protecting you and your family throughout it all. And so, my computer is pooped and gone, and of course, I can't go outside to get me another one, but it's okay. This message will still go out to you guys. And so, here I have my trusty notes. We're going to go over all of that today. And so, this is just raw footage for you guys. No editing, no nothing. And so, here we go. Today we're going to be in Isaiah, and this message we're going to be talking about. The topic will be Jesus. And what about Jesus? Well, his victory, his suffering, and his substitute. So today we'll be discussing those three topics with us about Jesus. And so, beginning with Isaiah, I branched it off into three parts. We'll talk in chapter 52, verse 13 through chapter 53 and verse 3. And so let's read along. So I got to remember this. 52, 13. Okay. All right. So it says right here, "Behold, my servant will prosper. He will be high and lifted up, greatly exalted. Just as many were astonished at you, my people, so the appearance was marred more than any human, and his form was more than the sons of men. Thus he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths on account of him, and what had not been told for them they will see, and what they had not heard they will understand." Chapter 53, "Who has believed our message, to whom the arm of the Lord has revealed? For he grew up before him like tender shoot, and like a root parched ground. He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken of men, and of sorrow, and of man, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face. He was despised, and we did not esteem him." And so, explaining what we just read, of course, we're going to be talking about the foretelling of what Jesus will do, which was those three things up there: the victory, the suffering, and the substitute. And so in this one, it talks about God's servant. To the people back in the day, to those back then, they had no clue to who the servant was. But for us, we know it clear as day that it was Jesus and what he's going to do for us. And so, beginning with the explanation, we see the negatives that Jesus will face. So he will be despised, he will be rejected, and he will be without impressive form, which the impressive form is being treated as less of a human. But we also forget to see the positive it brings out, which of course was those three things up there. What was shown here in this verses was the success after the trials. Also, to put it in modern forms, to get the good grade, you must study. And so in here, Jesus was going through the hardships it took in order to prosper in the end. And so moving on to another section, chapter 53, verse 4 through 9. It says, "Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being fell upon him, and his scourging we are healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that has been led to slaughter, and like the sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of living? For the transgression of my people to whom stroke was due. His grave was assigned with the wicked men, yet he was a rich man in his death, because he had not done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth." So back to the explanation on this one. It was griefs, in this case, also means sickness. For example, if you are sick, it might come with symptoms. Like, for example, the cold, you might have cough, have sneeze, have a fever or the flu, etc., etc. And I heard from a little website somewhere that says if you do have the coronavirus, it's like one of them is like a shortness of breath, and so be careful of that. But it does not mean that you will have the coronavirus if you do have shortness of breath. It's just a symptom. So it takes a couple of days. So yeah, and so in this one we find out that the griefs mean sickness, and sickness comes with side effects. But in this case, from what Jesus saved us from was sin. And of course, sin comes with a side effect as well. And that side effect is death. And so having like Jesus pay the penalty for us is now Jesus took away our sin. And so of course, with Jesus taking away our sin, he took away our sickness. And without sin, like it doesn't come with that symptom anymore. So in a sense, Jesus not only saved us from our sin, but also he took the punishment away from us. So that symptom of death is no longer with us because he took away the sin. And so chapter 53, verse 10 to 12, last section, it says, "But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, he would see his offspring. He will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. By his knowledge of the righteous one, my servant will justify the many, as he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will allot him a portion with the great, and he will divide the booty with the strong, because he poured out himself to death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he himself bore the sin of many, and interceded for the transgressors." And so, to sum up this one, God had actually planned for Jesus to suffer in this way, and it was pleasing with it, and God was pleased with it. He was pleased with Jesus' suffering. You might saying, Mike, why was God pleased with that? Well, because, hold on, there we go. It was so that our peace and our connection with God would be restored, and so that sin's curse, will no longer have power over us. So, in conclusion to the scriptures, what we just read so far, Jesus was treated cruelly. He was afflicted, meaning something that caused him pain and suffering, and he was treated below he was treated below a human, or I guess not being treated human. Yeah. Why? And was stripped of everything. Why? Because of us and our sin. So God had to let Jesus go through this because he could not break his own laws of sin sacrifices, which in the Old Testament there was guilt sacrifice, there was a sin sacrifice, there was all them other sacrifices which the priests had to do in order for God to forgive everyone. And so because of Jesus' work, we no longer have to do the work of the sin sacrifices or all those other sacrifices and come before God as his children, free of sin's curse. And so because of Jesus doing what he did, we no longer have to pay that punishment, and God can forgive us of our sins. And so, how can we learn from this? Well, God planned Jesus' suffering just like how he allowed suffering in our lives. Why? It is for God's glory and to build us up. Same thing how with Jesus, God planned his suffering, and he was pleased with it. Why? Because the purpose that Jesus did that was so that we can be freed. And so the purpose that we are suffering in our lives now, especially with the coronavirus, it's to help build us up. It's to help us go through these things and allow us to trust him in all our lives. And so, and God had to sacrifice Jesus because sin makes us want what God says not, what God says not to do. And in this, like for example, God said not to eat the fruit for Adam and Eve, but then Eve wanted it her way, and thus sin began. And that's how the sin offering or something like that. God had to have people do that because of that beginning sin. It was Eve. She didn't like. You could say she didn't like think that God's way was the right way or the correct way, and so she went on her own tangent, and so she did not listen to God, and so that's how sin entered into the world, and so that's why we got to sacrifice, and that's why Jesus had to come down. And so that concludes this message. This is just like I thought I was gonna have the little video camera today for my computer, but then of course my computer died. But it's okay, yeah. But I'll read it for you guys anyway. It says, I hope this message gave you insight on what God did so you can be freed from sin. And I pray He will protect you and your family throughout these coronavirus times and empower you to share what you learned today to other people. So I will conclude this 11 minutes. Yeah, so God bless and take care. Until next time, all right, guys? God bless.